You know, I get a call from the President of the United States in late November 2020 asking whether I would represent him in the Supreme Court. That's a call. The only answer to a question like that is, of course. A funny thing happened on the way to the forum, though. Huh? So I'm unindicted co-conspirator number 2 in D.C., indicted co-conspirator number 3 in Georgia, and indicted co-conspirator number 13 in Arizona. I dropped down in my ranking there. What's going on? I gave advice about, based on, as John, you pointed out earlier, based on open questions of constitutional law in areas that I'm one of, I think, probably a dozen or fewer experts in the country. Nevertheless, the lawyers in the California bar decided they knew more about the Constitution than all of the scholars that had been writing this and said I had no basis for it. They were so brilliant on their constitutional analysis that they served a subpoena on the Supreme Court of the United States to get a copy of the brief I filed. The clerk of the court wrote back and said, maybe you don't understand basic notions of federalism and supremacy clause, but we're not subject to the jurisdiction of the California Bar Court. And oh, by the way, the brief you're seeking is publicly available on our website. One of the charges against me for making misrepresentations and therefore exhibiting moral turpitude, that was the phrase they used over and over again in the 100-some page indictment against me in California, was that I had falsely claimed that dead people voted in my few minutes of remarks on the mall in front of the Ellipse. And that was false, and I knew it was false because by then the Inspector General of Michigan had already determined that only 1,500 dead people voted in Michigan. And I said, so you've just admitted my statement was true. Well, yeah, but what you really meant by that was more dead people voted than would have affected the outcome. This is the distortion of everything that's going on. The RICO charge in Georgia, the use of the mob witness intimidation statute in D.C., and I use that phrase deliberately. The statute was originally the mob witness intimidation statute. If I've got some witness that's going to turn state's evidence against the mob, and I threaten to kill him or his family, I add 20 years to the mob sentence you'd otherwise get. After Enron, we added another clause that says, or if you destroy all your financial records and in order to avoid prosecution, we're going to keep that 20-year felony sentence against you for that, or otherwise obstruct an official proceeding. That's the clause that they use against J6. That's 2 of the 4 counts against President Trump in D.C. that the Supreme Court finally threw out just last month, a couple weeks ago. The mob witness intimidation statute, the mob RICO statute down in Georgia, or the conspiracy charges down in Arizona. This weaponization is designed not just to go after the people that took political and constitutional positions contrary to the established state in our country, but to send a message to everybody else that if you dare stand up against us, we will bring all the force of government on you as well. That's the significance of what's going on. I mean, whether they take my bar license in California, I just assume they not, but it's not the big end of the world. My wife and I are close to retirement. We don't need that. It'd be nice to be able to continue to engage in the fight. But the bigger threat is David Brock, who's one of the powers behind the 65 Project. They brought over 100 bar complaints against all the lawyers that were involved in any of the litigation, election litigation. And he said, our goal is not just to get them disbarred, but to make them so toxic in their firms and their communities that right-wing legal talent will never stand up for these kind of election challenges again. Think about what that means. If they're going to steal the next election and the one after that and the one after that as far as the eye can see, they will only be able to do it if they first killed all the lawyers, or at least scared us into ever standing up against the illegality that was blatant in that last election. That's what the ultimate mission is. And thank you, Liz Cheney. You've made me probably the most famous lawyer in the world, and this is why they're coming after me, because I won't back down to it. And that's the key. The only way you push back against this stuff is to not back down to it. So when the California bar has a rule, state law, they're not allowed to disclose that there's an investigation going on unless they determine that the disclosure is necessary to protect the public. So the night before, a major brief was due by the January 6th committee in privilege log litigation that I was having with them. They turned it into a massive cost us $300,000 for privilege log litigation. The night before they had a major brief due, the head of the bar announced that they were doing an investigation of me, and then that's quoted in the brief, because I'm a threat to the public. When they recommended that I be disbarred and impose a stay, they didn't accept our request to stay that judgment pending the appeal because I'm a threat to the public. Now think about what that means. I'm a threat to the public because I won't shut up about what went on in the 2020 election. And I keep shining a light. And you know what? I've got the receipts. And they can't stand that. We have now moved from banana republic to Soviet-style tactics. Yerventi Berea, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. The exact opposite of Robert Jackson's pledge or plea to all the U.S. attorneys when he first became Attorney General under Franklin Roosevelt. He had a meeting of all the U.S. attorneys. So the biggest danger you're going to confront is the temptation to use the awesome prosecutorial power, not to go after crimes and figure out who done it, but to find people you don't like and scour the books to find some crime that you can pin them on. One of my legal team is Harvey Silverglade. He's the author 15, 20 years ago now of 3 felonies a day. He says every one of us commits 3 felonies a day, particularly with the elastic interpretation that these places are offering to it. So if they don't like you, they're not going to go after you for your speech. They're going to go after you for some anti-mob witness intimidation statute or some RICO provision. This is insane. And it will destroy the thing that has made us singularly the most successful regime in human history, and that is the rule of law. And that's what they're throwing out in their undivided effort to get Trump, to prevent Trump. By the way, if everybody knows, they keep saying to protect our democracy. How do you protect our democracy? By trying to keep the leading candidates off the ballot. It's like the antithesis of it. All right. Yeah, thank you. So, people say, well, why didn't you just give up the California bar license and get it licensed someplace else? They said I had no evidence. And none of the 65 courts, there was actually more than 100 court decisions, none of them ever looked at the evidence. They were mostly kicked out on various technical grounds, some correct. Ordinary citizens, surprisingly, don't have standing to challenge an illegal election, but the campaigns do. They were not given the opportunity to challenge those elections anyway. Some cases were brought before the election challenging illegal guidance by the secretaries of state, and the court said, it's only a guidance until they actually violate the law. The case is not ripe. Then they violated the law on election day, and they bring the same suit over again. And the court says, you can't wait till your guy loses to bring the case. It's like doctrine of latches. So it was damned if you do, damned if you don't. This was what went past for litigation and challenging that. So when they said I have no evidence in this bar complaint, I said, I got lots of evidence. I got probably more evidence than almost anybody else in the country. Because when I filed that brief on behalf of the president, in the Supreme Court, I had to put my email address on it. You want to see a flood of emails come in? Try that. Everywhere, anywhere in the world, anybody had something to say about what went on in the election, it came into me. And so I said, all right, they say I have no evidence. We're going to spend, and it's been $750,000 putting on the evidence. We're going to put on the evidence. We're going to put on the experts. What I was allowed to put on was unbelievable. And I'll show you how unbelievable it was. The judge didn't bother to cite any of it in her opinion that says I had no evidence. My favorite one of these, well, I told you the story of the dead people voting. But $750,000 to build the record that might be useful elsewhere. That's what you call pushback. People say, well, what do you think is going to happen in the future? Will they steal it again? Probably. There are millions of eyes watching this time, though, that weren't watching last time as a result of efforts like mine and other similar efforts to expose what's going on. It's critically important. And then people say, well, what about the next generation? Aren't they lost, all these kids being indoctrinated? And I'll tell you a little story. One of the kids I'm representing right now, virtually secondhand, because my bar license is suspended at the moment. But his name is Jaden Rodriguez. Jaden, you probably don't know the name, but you know his story because it went viral. He's the kid with the Gadsden flag patch on his backpack that got suspended from school. And he stood up to it. When his assistant principal and his teacher said, "You can't wear that patch because it's a symbol of slavery," he said, "No, ma'am, it's not. It's a symbol of standing up against government tyranny." That's the kind of kid that is going to be leading the next generation. And a lot of people at this conference are like that kid, and that gives me hope and optimism. Let me close with this story. We run our summer fellowship programs at the Claremont Institute. Lincoln, Publius, Marshall. I mostly teach in the Marshall Fellowship Program. Last summer's program was the week then the Georgia indictment handed down. And, so at the end of the week, we give them a nice dinner, good wine, and they roast each other and toast each other. And, they normally give a little nod to the faculty, "Thank you for much," and a nice toast. Well, I was indicted in the middle of the thing. They got to do something a little more than that. So they roast me. They say, I'm teaching a religion clause seminar with Janice Rogers Brown and Phil Munoz. When news of that came down and all the phones were ringing. And so the roast was, he continues to teach the religion clauses, and FBI jackbooted folks are rappelling down from the rooftops and come in and arrest them and carry them off. That didn't happen. But they said it was an exhibition of courage that was contagious, that everybody in the room decided to double down in their commitment to defend this country. And then the guy closed with this. He said, if you think about that last line in our national anthem, is the flag still waving? You remember with the line? He said, it's not so much whether the flag still waves. It's what kind of land is it waving over? Is it still the land of the free and the home of the brave? Or is it becoming the land of the coward and the home of the slave? That was profound. And that's why we fight. And any organization in this town or in this country that hasn't recognized we're in a war and is doing what they can to engage in that war doesn't understand or deserve our support. And there are a whole lot of them. There are a whole lot of them. They're sitting on the sidelines. And I've told some of them, I said, look, guys, keeping your head low so that the alligator eat you last has never been a winning strategy. It's not, never has been, and it's not now. We have to recognize this is a war. We have to engage in this war, and we got to do it with everything we've got, or we will lose something that we inherited that is more precious than life itself. And by God, I'm not going to sit by and let my kids and my grandkids, and I've got one already and another on the way, have to deal with things because we sat on our butts in silence while they were taking us over. That's why I fight, and I appreciate you all. If there's out in the Claremont Institute a way to read our Legal Defense Fund and keep updated on what we're doing, it's out on the Claremont Institute website. But stay in the fight. Get in the fight if you're not already, and get your other organizations in the fight as well, because this is the fight for our time, and it's every bit as important as the fight our grandfathers waged to protect freedom in the world in World War I and World War II, or the fight to get rid of slavery, or the fight that our founders fought to get rid of governmental tyranny that pales in comparison to the tyranny that we're dealing with. Get in the fight, stay in the fight until we win this fight. Thanks very much.